Hi everyone. So today I'll be talking about restraint and seclusion in schools and how this policy affects vulnerable student populations. I'll also share what I learned from the readings and bring in my own experience working as an instructional assistant in a resource setting. It's actually really nice to have some background knowledge in this, and I feel just slightly more prepared. All right. So, why this topic matters. This topic, restraint and seclusion, matters because it is used during crisis situations, but they can have serious emotional and physical impacts on children. They disproportionately affect vulnerable students, especially those with disabilities. So understanding this policy is crucial for anyone working in education. What is restraint? So restraint means restricting a student's movement, and it can be mechanical, chemical, or physical. In Arizona schools, only physical restraint is allowed, and even then, it's very limited due to be only used in extreme situations. Staff can't restrict a child's breathing, and the method must be appropriate for their age and physical condition. What is seclusion? Seclusion is when a student is placed alone in a room where they're unable to leave. This can only be used when there's imminent danger of harm, and the student must be visually monitored the entire time. As soon as the danger is gone, seclusion has to stop, and that has to be tracked. I'll explain further in another slide about how this kind of looks like. So, Arizona law is very clear. Restraint or seclusion can only happen if a student is in imminent danger of harming themselves or someone else, and if less restrictive options have already been tried. Parents must be notified the same day, and there has to be a written documentation afterward. The law aims to make sure these practices are rare and closely monitored. So, one thing that stood out in the data is that restraint and seclusion are not evenly used. According to the Government Accountability Office, 67% of restrained students were in special education, even though they only make about 12% of the student population. This shows a huge disproportionality that we need to pay attention to. Oftentimes, kids with IEP or that are in special educations are the ones to be restrained or secluded because they're not understood. It does take them a longer time try to figure out their emotions instead of being understood. So I believe that's why this information is like this. It might just be easier to restrain them, but I personally don't think it's the right thing to do because I think that sometimes they're scared as is. They don't understand what's going on or what is being asked from them. So going to this after even trial and error, I think it still affects them. So the federal government, including former Secretary of Education Arne Duncan, has warned that restraint and seclusion can lead to serious harm and even death. They also emphasize that there is no evidence that these practices improve behavior. Instead, schools are encouraged to use PBIS, trauma-informed care, and strong de-escalation strategies. So, one new concept I learned from this module was that restraint and seclusion happen more often than I thought. And I say this because I was trained on this specifically. And this is exactly what they told us, like last resort. So learning that it's used a lot more than I thought just kind of blows my mind. And it's not only used in special education settings. I used to work as a regular school para, and I didn't take the training. But now as a resource assistant, I did. So it's kind of difficult to understand when it can be taken or when it's used and so on. Previous district didn't use it at all. So I guess that's why I wasn't trained. I know there was people trained for it, but I mean, not only special education assistants should be taking this training. I used to believe it was something used primarily in specialized environments, but it's actually more common in general school settings than many more people realize. So, like I said, I currently work at a school as a instructional assistant in resource classroom, and my district required all of us to complete an 8-hour CPI training. That means Crisis Prevention Institute training. The whole focus was on nonviolent crisis intervention. They give us a book. They explained us how to help kids de-escalate, when to call in for backup, what we should do, so we could prevent escalation before it even reaches a crisis. Later in the training, they taught us the safe ways to maneuver or hold students only if restraint becomes absolutely necessary. The emphasis was always on safety, calm communication, and make sure both students and staff are protected. This training really aligned with what the reading stressed, that restraint is a last resort, not a behavior strategy. So, for young children, restraint and seclusion can be confusing and even traumatic, especially if they don't understand what's happening. It can affect their emotional development and their trust in adults. At the same time, I understand the intention behind the policy. In extreme situations where a child might hurt themselves or others, staff need guidance on what is allowed. But these practices should always come with prevention, documentation, and follow-up. They did stress at the training that whatever was happening, like, document if possible at that time or as soon as you have the opportunity, just so you don't forget. So the biggest takeaway from both the training and the reading is that prevention is key. Things like PBIS, predictable routines, emotional regulation strategies, calm down spaces, and trauma-informed approaches can prevent a crisis before restraint is even a consideration. When schools invest in these supports, restraint and seclusion become extremely rare. So, in conclusion, understanding restraint and seclusion is important because it highlights how we can protect our most vulnerable students. These practices should only be used as a last resort with proper training, documentation, and follow-up. Our focus as educators should always be proactive support, safety, and emotional well-being. These are the references I used for this presentation, mostly things that came from the reading. I also put in a lot from what I learned at my training, but it's very straightforward, just as a last resort.